There are things in this world that once they become known, it is almost impossible to never unknow them. I came across one of those facts just the other day watching Sargon of Akkad's latest video about, I think it's rape culture in the UK. I'll put a link in the bottom. In it, they were talking about a rape culture, and one man mentioned that, the vast majority of a certain type of rape, known as a grooming gang, is generally always made up of Muslims. You don't hear about this happening in other racial, cultural groups. It's exclusively to immigrant Muslims in the UK. The man who mentioned this was roundly disparaged and told that while that might be true, which it is, the vast majority of rapes are committed by white men in the UK. Well, as Sargon's video shows, that's true. 30% of all identified rapists in the UK are white. 26% of rapists are apparently unidentified. 28% of rapists are Muslims. Now, you might say, oh, well, 30, and because with the way statistics work, you have a margin of error of about plus or minus 2 to 3%. So we can say that the amount of rapists, identified rapists, are, say, about 30% white and 30% black, give or take a bit. Now, you might just say, oh, well, rape culture, rape is prominent, men rape, blah, 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 blah. The problem is when you start looking at population statistics. Whites in the UK make up about 81.9%, roughly 82% of the UK population is white. The Muslim population of the UK is about 4.8%. Now, assuming gender parity between men and women in each racial group, that means about 41 or so percent of the UK population is white men, and about 2.4% is Muslim men. Two 2.4% of the population manages to commit as much rape as 40% of the population. Now, amongst those two populations, the white men at 41% and the Muslim men at 2.4%, not every one of those is a rapist. In fact, one would make the argument that the vast majority of them are not rapists. Or at least we would like to believe so. Now, among, the white population, the worst you could say is, 40% is responsible for 30%, which means, worst case scenario, one man to one rape, you've still got about 10% of the population which does not rape. You don't have that with the Muslim population. In fact, if you did it at a one man equals, or 1% equals one person, however you want to put it, if you do a 1-to-1 rate, it comes out more like Muslim men rape a totality of about 11 women each, if you look at the numbers that way. Now, I do have some numbers about how many reported rapes there are. According to BBC One, in 2007, there were a total of about, 85,000 reported rapes. So if you break that down, 30% of that is about 25,500 women. So the white rapists raped 25,500 women, and the Muslim rapist raped about 25,500 women reported. Now, this is not counting unreported. This isn't even getting into the 26% where the attacker was not identified, which I've heard other stuff out there where, a lot of the attackers are somewhat identified, but the identity isn't recorded for the sake of the fact that potentially all unidentified attackers, or at least the vast majority of them, you could say, 26% are unidentified. And I've read stuff through various websites who link to police statistics that could hint towards up to 20 percentages of that 26, leaving just 6%. Up to 20% of those unidentified could be Muslim as well. So you're looking at the potential of, at least in the UK, up to nearly 50 plus percentage of rapes are committed. But what we do have is the reported statistic, and that says about 30% of them. Now, that, frankly, is a little bit terrifying. Like I said, when you get down to it, for at a minimum, you're looking at a 1 to 11 ratio. I did some math where I counted it at 1/15 of each population is responsible for the 30% of rapes, and it came out to something like 305 rapes are committed by Muslims for every 4 rapes committed by a white man, or roughly something like that. I'm not entirely sure on my math. I'm not the best at it, but that's about what it came down to, or a 1 in 76 ratio. Because there's just that much of a difference in population. Like at 15 or 1 in 15. Let's say here. So, like I said, white people are about 82% of the UK, make up about 51,736,290 people, give or take a few. 50% of these are men, so that's about 25,868,145. Taking the 1 out of every 15, we get a, potential population of 1,724,543 potential people who would potentially do this. Doing the 1 in 15 potentially would out of the Muslim population leaves a total of about 92,888. There literally is a difference of 1,631,655 between the two potential theoretical populations of men who might rape. And I'm pretty sure the statistic for that is actually a lot lower. It's probably like, 1 in 30 men might do it or something like that. Unfortunately, I couldn't find, what percentage of the population commits rape anywhere online. If somebody can find that, by all means, link it. I will use that to create further calculations, but yeah. That's where it stands. there is an incredibly massive margin between the two population sizes and the activity of those populations. Now, like I said, the reported rapes were, only about, 85,000 back in 2007. I don't know if that number's gone up. I couldn't find any better numbers closer to our current period on that. I don't know if the police department just hasn't released it or how it goes, but that's the number I could find, and that was 7 years ago. I can only imagine it's probably gone up since then. But, you can base your own decisions on how many unreported rapes there are that are out there. But based on the ratios, the number could be cataclysmic, depending on, how active any of that percentage of the population is that actually does commit rape rather than just potentially commits rape. And yet, despite the fact that, there is such a massive difference in the ratio, of Muslim population versus to how responsible they are for rape happening. It's intolerable that nothing is done about this. But then again, I suppose the UK should know all about that, since, Rotherham finally came out publicly for having happened for 20 years. I knew about it, I knew about it at least 5 years ago. People knew about it before that even, because I learned about it from them. So people have known about it, probably from the beginning. Within the first 2 or 3 years, it was put out that the local governance and police department knew all about the grooming gang that was set up in their hometown that was kidnapping, drugging, raping, and I believe prostituting and even selling girls as young as 11 for the sole privilege of Muslim men. They knew about it for 20 years, and they didn't do anything because they were afraid of being called racists. Well, I'm sorry, but, as a heathen, as a human being, as the son of hell, the son of the goddess of the dishonored dead, I know a thing or two about, facing unpleasant consequences to your actions. But sometimes you have to sacrifice yourself for the greater good, for the cause of justice and law. And it shouldn't have mattered to the police or the governance if they got called a racist. These were innocent lives. 20 years worth of innocent lives. I've heard numbers somewhere around 1,400 girls, and I have no idea if that was the total number over the course of 20 years, or if that was just the number of girls in the last couple of years. But let's say it is, 1,400 girls is the total number over 20 years. That's 70 girls a year. Now, I don't know what average classroom size over in the UK is, but I heard, lately that average classroom size in the United States is somewhere around 35 to 40 kids. That is 2 full classrooms worth of girls a year. That had to have been fucking noticed. And it was. And that should have been fucking stopped. And it wasn't. And most of those, because those were rapes, repeated rapes, actually went unreported. Because the police would say, oh, well, there's no evidence, or we can't get any evidence, or we won't pursue it because we don't want to be racists. and you should stop pursuing it because you're racist. And they actually would arrest the parents and the fathers who would try to go in these houses and rescue their teenage daughters from this activity. They would go in and arrest the men in full view of what was happening. But they wouldn't arrest the rapists. Oh, no. You wouldn't want to be a racist, would you? And you know what's even sadder about all this? That happens in every major city in the United Kingdom. It has been for at least 20 years. Rotherham's the one you know about, but you don't know about the rest of them. But they're out there. Every major city and a lot of the minor cities, from what I understand. Every single one has a grooming gang of some scale. Fun and also interesting statistic on this, which may actually skew the numbers to be even worse to an extent, is 66% of new converts to Islam in the UK are women. Think about that. I want you to sit there and I want you to think about that number. 66% of local UK converts are women. Muslim men are responsible for at least 30% of all reported rapes. They could be responsible for an even higher percentage of reported rapes. We don't even have numbers for the unreported rapes. But, given instances like Rotherham, at least 70 girls a year for 20 years, 95%, I would guess, just pulling it out of my ass, probably were unreported. Because, heck, after the first few years, parents have got to know, there's no point going to the police over this shit. They're not going to care. They don't care that my daughter's being drugged and addicted and raped repeatedly, day in and day out. No, the police don't care. So why even bother reporting it? People want to talk about, British racist political parties like the, British National Party. But that's exactly where this was born from. It was born from the realization that their politicians had no desire to go out and stop this. So, racist political parties started up to try and stop it. And they were denounced as racist, and in a lot of ways, they didn't go anywhere because there is so much of a cover-up by the police and the government and the media in the UK to hide this stuff. And anybody who tries to talk about it is automatically and instantaneously denounced as a racist and shut out of the public forum. So the news hasn't gotten out there to larger people. But if you look at the Muslim density population charts of the UK, and as Sargon of Akkad's video points out, the rape crisis center locations, they're spot on. They are literally spot on. And that's just in the UK. That's not talking about France, Germany, Poland, Spain, Italy, and don't get me started on Sweden. Sweden is worse. I've read statistics that say somewhere around 90% of all stranger rape is by Muslim men in Sweden. And that accounts for nearly the entirety of rape in Sweden. Nearly the entirety of rape in Sweden is stranger rape. And nearly at least 90% of that, if not more, is at the hands of Muslim immigrant men. Now, people want to throw the word racist around a lot. people like to throw the word Islamophobia around a lot. Oh, well, you're just an Islamophobe. You're just a racist. Your opinion doesn't matter. Well, okay, sure. Maybe my opinion doesn't matter. But, the last time I checked, public opinion was that rape was wrong. And if you have a tiny, tiny percent of the population causing massive amounts of the rape, that's not a matter of opinion. That's a matter of fact. That is a matter of reality. And I don't care if you think discrimination is wrong or you think racism is wrong, which it is. But, racism comes from a set place and a set mindset. And often enough that mindset is in ignorance. But occasionally you do learn to hate a people or an ideology because of what they do. And if you want to call that racist, that's fine. I guess I'll bloody well be a racist then, because I think if 2.4% of a population is responsible for 30+% of the nation's rape, extradition, or expulsion, I should say, is an acceptable response. Heck, the demonic side of me thinks that extermination is a reasonable response at that point, because it has been going on for over 20 years. Rotherham occurred for 20 years, which means that before that, this had to be enough of an issue that Muslim men realized, hey, we can get away with it. Nobody's gonna fucking stop us. And they decided to sing the rape song and go raping all day as they sang. And it's permitted to continue by the UK government. It is encouraged to continue by the United Nations, not the UN, the EU, sorry. The EU is insisting on even more open immigrant policies to allow even more in. My gods, people, if 2.4% can commit 30% of the rapes, imagine if that number goes up to, hell, let's say 4.8%. That means that percentage is going to climb. Now, I'm not going to say it's going to climb and, double, but what if it did? What if, let's say, they're responsible for 30% of currently reported rapes? Well, then, technically, if the population doubles, it would double, so it would be, the value of 60% of the current reported rapes. Of course, it might not actually end up becoming 60% because, percentages don't quite work that way. But you're still skyrocketing it. The percentage might not go to 60% because the sheer number of rapes would be going up, which would lower the actual percentage statistically. But I mean, dear freaking gods, people. We had the Holocaust, and it taught us in the West, along with World War I and World War II and the, devastating potential of the Cold War, which essentially was World War III. It taught us the value of life, and we learned that we needed to be accepting of ideologies, and we needed to be accepting of people, and that there wasn't just one right way to solve this. There didn't have to be one single way to run the world. We could have a lot of different ideas, and we could have a lot of different approaches. And the Muslim world never learned that. The Muslim world was not really part of World War I, which taught us the horror of mass warfare. They weren't really a part of World War II, which taught us the horror of eugenics and totalitarian ideology. And they weren't part of the Cold War in any real sense, and they never learned the absolute danger that can come with a single-minded supremacist ideology willing to destroy the world for its own gain. Now, a lot of people can talk about Putin and him being a blowhard or a fascist or a conqueror or warmonger or something like that, but Putin is smart. Putin learned the lessons. Putin is not going to go back down that same road. He'll do what's best for his country, but he won't risk nuclear war over the entire planet just to get what he wants. But Islam and Muslims didn't learn that. Their lessons are the same lessons they've had for the entirety of Islam's existence, 1,000 or so years it's been around. Which is, ours is the only way. Kill and rape everybody who doesn't believe until they believe, And we're now facing a worldwide conflict that has gone on for nearly, 20-something odd years, especially if you start counting the bombings that have occurred off American soil. Americans like to think the war on terror started, back in 2001 with the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. Well, no. Technically, it didn't. Our war on terror began. But the Islamist war, the war we fought over in Afghanistan and nominally fought in Iraq and have been fighting all over the planet, no, that started back in the 90s. I think, one of the first instances I remember is, was the USS Cole was bombed by Muslim terrorists. And that was in the early 90s. So, we are in a war that's gone on for nearly 30 years, if not more, of which maybe 15 we've been conscious of. And in that time, we've gone from seeing isolated groups of terrorist networks, blowing up ships, to blowing up buildings, to forming their own country. And the population that has that ideology is not just in the country where ISIS is trying to take over. No, it is everywhere. It is in the UK, it is in Europe, and it is what is responsible for these kinds of numbers. A sane, respectful population does not have these kinds of numbers. 2.4% of a sane, rational, equal-believing population that respects the people around it does not commit 30% of the rapes in its own country. So, call me a racist if you want to, but the numbers don't lie. And, well, sometimes they do. But these are the lying numbers, if that's the case. These are the numbers that lie. This is what they can try and get away with covering up. And it still comes out this bad. And people wonder why I, as a demonic demigod of the Norse pantheon, despise Islam as a religion and the actions of a number of its people as a whole. This kind of shit is why. And I'm going to leave you with one last number before I go, which is 300 million. That is roughly the population size of the United States of America, one of the largest countries on the planet. It is also the number of people worldwide who are Muslims that believe in an Islamist supremacist ideology. That is a 1-to-1 ratio for the United States versus the Islamist population. Literally up to 1/4 of Muslims believe that theirs is the only ideology that should exist on this planet. Now, some generous people want to put it at 1 in 15. but the average respected number I've heard is 300 million Islamists all over the world. Think about that.